The town of Oak Ridge had a long-standing tradition. Every Friday night, without fail, the residents ordered pizza from Luigi's Pizzeria. Luigi's was famous not just for its mouth-watering slices, but also for its speedy delivery. The delivery boys were local teens who knew every nook and cranny of the small town. Among them was Jake, an 18-year-old with a mop of dark hair and an easygoing smile. One particular Friday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake received an order for a large pepperoni pizza. The address was unfamiliar, tucked away in the woods on the outskirts of town. Must be a new family, Jake thought as he loaded the steaming pizza into his car. The drive took longer than he expected. The road became narrower and more twisted as he ventured deeper into the forest. Gnarled branches formed eerie shapes against the night sky, and the usual hum of civilization was replaced by an unsettling silence. Finally, Jake arrived at the destination, a dilapidated mansion that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Ivy clung to the crumbling stone walls and the windows were boarded up. He double-checked the address, thinking there must be a mistake, but it matched perfectly. With some trepidation, Jake grabbed the pizza and approached the creaky front door. He rang the doorbell, which let out a mournful chime that echoed through the empty halls. Moments later, the door swung open with a slow, foreboding creak. Standing in the doorway was an old woman with deep-set, hollow eyes. Her skin was pale and papery, as if she hadn't seen sunlight in years. She wore a faded black dress that hung loosely from her thin frame. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. She handed Jake a crumpled $10 bill, far less than the cost of the pizza. Before Jake could protest, the woman reached out with a skeletal hand and pulled the pizza box towards her. "Come in, boy. It's not safe outside at night," she said, a hint of urgency in her voice. Jake hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run back to his car, but curiosity got the better of him. "Just for a minute," he told himself as he stepped over the threshold. The inside of the mansion was even more decrepit than the outside. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. As Jake followed the woman down a dark hallway, he noticed family portraits lining the walls. The faces in the pictures were solemn and haunting, their eyes seeming to follow him as he walked by. The woman led him to a grand dining room, where an ancient, rotting table stood in the center. She placed the pizza box on the table and opened it, revealing the steaming pie. Jake watched in horror as the woman's eyes grew wide with hunger. She tore into the pizza with a ferocity that belied her frail appearance. "You must be hungry too," she said between bites. "Let me get you something." Before Jake could decline, she shuffled out of the room, leaving him alone. As he waited, Jake's unease grew. He glanced around the room, noticing strange symbols carved into the walls and floor. A feeling of dread settled over him, and he decided he'd had enough. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Heart pounding, Jake tried to open the door, but it was locked tight. Panic set in as he pounded on the door, shouting for help. His cries echoed through the empty house, unanswered. Suddenly he heard the woman's voice behind him. "You can't leave, boy, not yet." Jake spun around to see her standing in the doorway, holding a rusty butcher knife. Her eyes gleamed with a mad light, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You're the first delivery we've had in years," she said, stepping closer. "And we always pay our debts." Jake backed away, his mind racing for an escape route. He spotted a window and made a desperate dash for it. He smashed the glass with his elbow and scrambled through the opening, cutting himself on the shards. He hit the ground running, not daring to look back. The forest seemed to close in around him, branches clawing at his clothes as he fled. He could hear the woman's laughter echoing behind him, growing fainter as he sprinted towards his car. Finally, Jake reached his vehicle, his hands shaking as he fumbled for the keys. He jumped in, started the engine, and tore down the narrow road, never looking back. When he returned to town, he went straight to the police station and told them everything. They listened with skeptical eyes but agreed to investigate. The next day, they drove out to the mansion, but there was no sign of the old woman or the strange symbols Jake had described. The house, however, was very real, and it bore the marks of having been recently inhabited. Jake never delivered to the outskirts of town again. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. And every Friday night, as he watched the sunset, he remembered the old woman and her eerie mansion, and he whispered a silent prayer for the next delivery boy who might not be so lucky.